John Oliver. Back in the day, I watched his show and thought he was interesting and had a lot of good points. But a few years back, it got to the point where I could not watch him anymore because it was clear that at a minimum, his arguments were disingenuous. And in my opinion, he is just flat out deceptive now. And, be it if he's pushing the agenda of his bosses or the, media conglomerate he works for, or his personal circle, he is just completely full of it and making false argument after false argument. And props to Matt Walsh just totally shredding him and his ridiculous arguments. And yeah, it's comedy and blah blah blah, but he's doing a disservice. He's stoking the fire of ignorance and getting people fired up, believing things that they probably either shouldn't believe or have a little more skeptical look at.
The issue of trans athletes has become very important to conservatives in general and Donald Trump in particular.
Right off the bat, very very important to conservatives, very important to everyone. It's like from everything I've seen, it's at least 70-80%, if not higher. And that 20-30% that supposedly is in support of it, I've seen interview after interview where women will not publicly be against men in women's sports, but they will privately say they're against it. But obviously, if you're in a tight knit group, here's the deal, guys. Anyone who has a child who they've transitioned, first off, you shouldn't be allowed until it's 18 anyway. But anyone who has done that and possibly destroyed that child's life, the stats for unaliving yourself are double everybody else. Just a lot of horrible, it's a horrible life. And, clearly someone who's gone down that road is going to defend it to the for the Republicans or an obsession for the left. We're looking at a total collapse of the Democratic Party because they refuse to let this go, even though the vast majority of the population agrees that men should be out of women's sports. Government, where they're taking tax dollars, giving it to nonprofits and non-governmental associations who are pushing this agenda on the country, on the world, and donating the money back mostly to the left.
So he starts with the old, why are you so obsessed with this routine, as expected. He then says that this obsession by Republicans is the reason why 6 in 10 adults don't want men in women's sports. Now, the actual number is more like 8 in 10, but either way, he says that Republicans have waged a relentless propaganda campaign against trans people, and that is why so many Americans now agree with them. Oliver has this, of course, completely backwards. John, let me ask you this. What did the poll on trans athletes say 20 years ago? What about 30 years ago? I mean, if the poll numbers today are the result of a recent propaganda push by Republicans, that should be borne out by comparison of the count.
So I'll put the link to the original video, guys. It basically just goes into the fact that there is no data. There will never be any data because no one is going to no one's going to put money into a study. Girls are girls, guys are guys. Nobody's going to put a study into oh, are guys better at sports than women? Of course they are. It's just totally ridiculous. No, there's never going to be data other than unless it's pushed by the trans community, trans lobbyists, that kind of thing.
Counter argument, and then frames the entire rest of his rant around that one single example. If you wanted to find an example of somebody making the case against men and women's sports, you have literally thousands of options to choose from. Thousands and thousands of people have made this case on camera. Female athletes, biologists, doctors, highly credentialed scientific experts in any number of related fields. But John sifted through all of that and went with Lance Armstrong, because Lance Armstrong is infamous for cheating in a sport. Now, I would say that probably about 99.9999% of all the people who have made the case against men and women's sports are not themselves famous for cheating in a sport. But Oliver went searching for the one person who was. And he uses the silly hypothetical offered by Armstrong, Rafael Nadal suddenly transitioning to a woman, as the framing mechanism for the entire rest of his argument. So Oliver has chosen the absolute weakest version of the opposing argument offered by the weakest possible spokesman, and that will be the only argument he responds to the whole rest of the way. Now, of course, Even the weakest version of our argument offered by the weakest spokesman is still totally devastating to John's side. Our weakest argument is made of steel compared to the flimsy fantasyland nonsense that you hear from the pro-trans side. Now, Armstrong is in fact correct. If all it takes for a man to be a woman is to identify as one, then if Nadal or any other championship level male athlete identified as a female, he would now be a female by your logic. There's nothing stopping him from dominating women's sports or women's tennis like Shaquille O'Neal in his prime playing basketball against a bunch of 9-year-olds. The point isn't that Nadal is actually likely to do this. It's that the policy that John Oliver advocates for and the position that he takes would make that sort of absurdity possible, which tells us that it's an absurd policy. But Oliver is determined to miss the point, of course, which he continues to do here.
And guys and gals, whoever's watching this, here's the thing, and it's not touched on here, but young men are at a historically horrible place. And if they're already put down and shunned and told to shut up and be in their place, they are desperate for attention. They're desperate for a win. And to say that men don't transition for that attention or to play in sports is just totally absurd. It's and that's why there's people identifying as cats and dogs, and I saw something about identifying as a turtle. Like, it's never going to end because whoever has the least amount of attention, they're going to try to up the ante and identify something that nobody's identified before. Try to be that much more fanatical and take the attention from everyone else. It's just a sad reflection on where society's at.
Netherlands.
And even that last thing, the everything I've seen recently on this debate is the most I don't know, possibly the most depressed demographic of any number you can compute. I mean, I think the thing that says it all is people unaliving themselves at double the rate of anything else. So saying that they're doing it to be more happy is also, I think, disingenuous.
Sake of sports.
Oh, they don't? Well, first of all, John, how do you know that? I mean, there are many examples of mediocre male athletes who, after a while, not succeeding against the men, suddenly discover their latent female identity. Leah Thomas is just one of many examples. How do you know that the fact that he could go from the middle of the pack to first by a mile isn't what motivated him to make the switch? That trans sports scientist that we saw there says that the social cost of transitioning is too high. He says that he personally lost his marriage and his family when he transitioned. In other words, he willingly blew up his marriage and family for the sake of living out his fantasy of womanhood. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that he's extremely selfish.
Well, and talking about selfishness, money. If you're allowed to compete in a women's sport and dominate and be number one and get prizes and get money, that is an incentive right there.
It tells us by his own admission that trans people will do anything to feel affirmed. They'll pay any cost. They'll hurt anyone. I mean, that's what he just told us. He hurt his own family. So would they be willing to hurt female athletes for the sake of being affirmed? I mean, the argument seems to be that trans-identified people would never transition just to succeed in sports because they're too selfish for that. But I'm not sure that logic really tracks. And at any rate, none of this matters.
Well, and one other point is, do we, they talk about percentages and maybe women beat guys at certain things and blah, blah, blah. Do we ever hear about women playing in men's sports? I've never heard of it. Let me know if I'm wrong, but yeah, never ever hear about women playing in men's sports.
Or at least it's the point about the athletic advantages. But even that point is not the point. John Oliver still has not addressed the actual point.
Anyway, guys, I get sick of his jokes to try to ignore the silliness. But again, I'll put the video for Matt Walsh, so you guys can watch the whole thing if you want. But yeah, what do you guys think? Is he trying to make? Does he really believe this stuff? Is he trying to make the media heads happy? Is he trying to make his friend group happy? Trying to make his wife happy because things aren't good there. I just think it's He's not this dumb. There is no way that he looked at this and believes all the stuff he's touting everybody. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's an idiot. But what do you guys think?